My name is Margaret Hale, and I am 63 years old. I have lived most of my adult life believing that calm perseverance solves nearly everything. I married young, raised 2 children, nurtured a career I genuinely cared about, and worked hard to leave bitterness behind whenever life tried to hand it to me. But as I've learned more than once, sometimes it isn't life that hands you trouble. Sometimes it's the people who smile the widest and call you family. For most of the past decade, I've shared a 3-unit property with my husband, our son, and his wife, my daughter-in-law, Emily. It was my idea originally. I believed multi-generational living kept families strong. I saw it as an old-fashioned way of staying connected. The kind that ensures you never slip through the cracks of each other's lives. But my husband's mother, Lorraine, lived just 15 minutes away and visited so often she might as well have been another tenant. Lorraine is a woman who never learned to whisper. She speaks in pronouncements, as though every thought is a decree. And she has an opinion about everything, especially the roles women should play in a family. She liked to tell me, and loudly, a good wife shares everything: money, burdens, responsibilities. Good women don't keep secrets. She said it often enough that it became her signature greeting. And although I learned to smile politely, each time she said it I felt something cold crawl up my spine. As if her definition of sharing wasn't about partnership at all, but control. One late afternoon, while the sun was sliding behind the maple trees that lined our shared driveway, I found Lorraine and Emily whispering near the mailbox. When they noticed me approaching, their conversation snapped shut like a trap. They exchanged a look. Quick, guilty, almost nervous. That was my first quiet warning. Because in my household, silence never means peace. Silence always means preparation. I walked past them with a warm nod, but inside I felt a small, unmistakable shift. A pressure in the air. A sense that something had tilted in the dynamics of our tidy little family arrangement. I didn't know it then, but that shift was the softest beginning of an earthquake. And the first tremor would strike the very next week, at a bank, of all places. The banker slid a document across the desk, tapped a name line, and asked me, "Mrs. Hale, did you approve this withdrawal?" I sat across from the bank manager, a calm man with silver glasses and the kind of voice that aims to soothe before delivering unpleasant news. The branch was quiet, just the faint hum of printers and the shuffle of paperwork from cubicles behind us. The document he had placed in front of me was a withdrawal authorization form, $42,000 removed from our joint renovation savings account. It wasn't an account meant for anyone else. Not my children. Not my mother-in-law. Not even my husband without telling me. We had built that fund together over a decade, planning upgrades to the property we all shared. But the manager didn't ask me if I recognized my husband's handwriting. He asked if I approved it. I stared at the form. The signature on the line was mine. My name, my cursive. Perfectly faked. "No," I said softly. "I never saw this before today." The manager hesitated. "I thought that might be the case," he admitted. "Your husband came in with his mother last week. They insisted the withdrawal was needed urgently. But bank policy required your approval as well. That's why, well, this appeared." He tapped the signature. It took me a moment to breathe. My husband forged my name. Or, more accurately, someone forged it for him. I left the bank with a printed statement, a copy of the forged authorization, and a sense of disorientation so sharp it felt like sudden vertigo. When I got into my car, my hands trembled so hard I had to sit there for several minutes before I could even turn the key. $42,000. Gone. My signature used without my knowledge. My husband acting with his mother by his side. The moment I stepped into the house, Lorraine greeted me before I could even set down my bag. "There you are," she said, her voice syrupy and smug. "Your husband told me you'd be running errands. I hope you didn't mind us taking care of the renovation funds. A good wife shares everything, you know." Her words snapped into place like a puzzle piece I didn't want to see. She knew. She knew about the forgery. Maybe she even orchestrated it. I asked her where the money went, but she waved a dismissive hand. Family needs, dear. You don't need the details. In that moment, betrayal didn't feel like a sharp stab. It felt like a slow, suffocating pressure. But pressure can turn into something else if you let it. Clarity. And in that moment, I felt the first spark of it. That night, while everyone slept, I pulled out an old locked box, and realized I wasn't the only one forging signatures in that household. When I was in my 30s, long before my hair turned silver and my patience refined into something deliberate, I learned a painful lesson. People with power only relinquish it when you stop pretending not to see what they're doing. My husband, Daniel, wasn't always this way. He had been a gentle young man once, raised by a woman who treated him like an extension of herself rather than a son. Lorraine taught him that loyalty meant obedience, and obedience meant silence. That control, wrapped in maternal affection, wasn't control at all, just care misunderstood. He never truly separated from her influence. Not emotionally. Not financially. Not even after decades of marriage. But I had always worked. I had always kept my finances clean and documented. And I had always believed in protecting my independence. Quietly, without creating waves. The locked box in my closet held decades of paperwork, tax filings, old contracts, deeds, copies of agreements, and a file I kept for emergencies. One that contained every bank statement for accounts Lorraine insisted were family managed over the years. I opened the box and sifted through folders until I found it. The file from 8 years earlier, when Lorraine convinced Daniel to temporarily move money from a joint business account into an investment opportunity her friend was offering. I remembered the uneasiness I felt back then. I remembered requesting a copy of the transfer form. And I remembered noticing something strange. My husband's signature looked stiff, oddly smooth, as though traced. It was the first time I suspected forgery in our household. I never confronted it because the amount was small, and the investment eventually returned a profit. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. But looking at it now, knowing what I knew after the bank visit, it was obvious. The forgery from 8 years ago looked eerily similar to the one made last week. Same slant. Same curl at the M. Same unnatural pressure on the downward strokes. Someone had been practicing my handwriting for years. And the person with both motive and audacity was Lorraine. Her worldview was simple. The family's money was hers to orchestrate. A good wife like me, in her mind, should surrender to that older woman authority. But that belief wasn't born from wisdom. It was born from fear. Fear of losing relevance. Fear of losing control. Fear that her son might see her for who she truly was if she didn't keep him financially tethered. I closed the box slowly, my mind settling into a new state, one I hadn't experienced in decades. A quiet, strategic clarity. If they had forged my signature once, they could do it again. And this time, they had overreached. When I opened our shared office desk the next morning, I found something that made every suspicion snap into certainty. A handwriting practice sheet with my name written dozens of times. The handwriting practice sheet wasn't hidden. It sat beneath a stack of envelopes in the office drawer, almost as if someone had forgotten to put it away. My name, Margaret Hale. Written 30, maybe 40 times. Slight variations. Some careful, some rushed. But all unmistakably attempts to mimic my exact signature. A chill ran down my arms, and yet I felt strangely calm. Not the calm of denial. The calm of someone who finally sees the battlefield clearly. I began documenting everything. I took photos of the sheet from multiple angles. Then photos of the forged withdrawal authorization. Then photos of the old traced signature from 8 years ago. I created a digital folder. I added timestamps. I even recorded a brief video walking through each piece of evidence. Documentation is the greatest weapon a quiet woman can wield. The next step was to understand where the $42,000 had gone. I needed access to accounts Lorraine managed, the ones Daniel dismissed as family pots. He had always been careless with passwords, believing I never looked through his things. In truth, I rarely did, because I never needed to. But now necessity outweighed politeness. His password notebook, dated and sloppy, sat in the bottom drawer of his nightstand. I opened the online banking portal using one set of credentials and felt my breath catch. There it was. The money had been moved into a private account under Lorraine's name. Not jointly held. Not family managed. Sole ownership. The account was old, opened long before the marriage, and labeled simply Legacy Fund. Legacy for whom? Certainly not me. Further down the transaction history, I saw another disturbing pattern. Small withdrawals, each under $1,000, spaced over months. They originated from the same renovation savings account. Not enough to trigger alarms individually, but collectively. Thousands siphoned slowly. This hadn't been a single betrayal. It had been a long-term strategy. I printed everything, every statement, every suspicious transfer, every mismatch of signatures. I organized them into a binder, using color tabs for clarity. As I worked, a deeper question formed inside me. Did my son know? Did Emily? I wanted to believe they were innocent. That Lorraine and my husband had acted alone. But innocence becomes complicit the moment a person benefits and says nothing. To answer that, I needed hard proof. And just as I closed the binder, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Light, hurried. Then my daughter-in-law's voice. Margaret, are you in there? Her tone wasn't casual. It was tense. Almost worried. Emily stepped into the room, glanced at the open binder and whispered, "Please tell me you didn't find out what they did." Emily stood in the doorway, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. She wasn't someone prone to anxiety, so her reaction told me everything before she even spoke. "You knew," I said quietly. Not accusing. Simply acknowledging the truth settling between us. She closed the door behind her and nodded. "I didn't know the full amount," she said. "But I knew they were transferring things. Your husband told me not to get involved. He said Lorraine had a system, and that questioning her would cause unnecessary drama." I almost laughed. Drama wasn't caused by asking questions. It was caused by hiding the answers. I motioned for her to sit, and she did, sinking into the office chair with a defeated sigh. "I tried to warn Daniel," she continued. "I told him forging your name was illegal. He said Lorraine assured him it wasn't forgery because family shares everything." There it was again. Lorraine's mantra. A good wife shares everything. Emily looked at me with genuine remorse. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I didn't want to betray my husband. But this has gone too far." For a moment, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Relief that not everyone under this roof had fallen under Lorraine's influence. "Emily," I said gently, "I don't need you to defend me. I just need the truth." And she gave it to me. Piece by piece. Lorraine had been coaching Daniel for months, telling him the renovation fund was wasted sitting idle, and that she could invest it properly. She told him I'd understand. That I was too busy to notice small transactions. That married couples don't need permission slips for money. But the worst part. Emily revealed that Lorraine planned to use the money to prepare her estate, which was code for transferring assets into her own name so she could control how they'd be distributed later. She wanted authority over the entire property, including the part one owned outright. She wanted power. All of it. Emily looked at me with tired eyes. She said you're too independent. That you have too much say in the way things are run around here. Ah. So that was the real motive. I wasn't the fragile, obedient daughter-in-law she could mold. I was an obstacle. Emily reached for my hand. "What are you going to do?" I closed the binder slowly. I felt the calm return, not the peace of resignation, but the quiet strength of someone preparing for justice. "I'm going to show the truth," I said. "Because revenge doesn't require cruelty. It requires clarity. And documentation speaks louder than rage." The next morning, I invited everyone to the dining room. Daniel, Emily, and Lorraine. When Lorraine sat down, I slid the binder toward her and said, "Let's go through this together." The dining room felt colder than usual that morning. Sunlight stretched across the table in long white lines, illuminating every expression, every twitch, every lie waiting to unravel. Lorraine sat with her arms folded, chin lifted high as though preparing to preside over a court instead of being summoned to one. Daniel looked confused, perhaps hopeful that this meeting was about something trivial. Emily sat quietly beside me, her presence steady but nervous. I placed the binder in the center of the table and opened it to the first page. A photo of the forged authorization. Daniel swallowed hard. "Margaret," he began, "I can explain." "No," I said calmly. "You can respond after I present everything. There will be no talking over me. No excuses. This is a fact-based conversation." Lorraine scoffed. "A good wife doesn't interrogate her family." I looked directly at her. "A good wife protects her home. And forgery is not family unity." She blinked, startled by the firmness in my voice. For the first time, she seemed unsure of her footing. I turned the pages one by one. The transfer history. The matching signatures. The old forged document from 8 years ago. The handwriting practice sheet. Each item was a quiet blow. Daniel's face paled further with every page. Lorraine's arrogance slid slowly into agitation, then irritation, then something resembling fear, though she masked it poorly. When I finished, I folded my hands on the table. "Daniel," I said evenly, "did you forge my signature?" He shook his head quickly. No, I didn't." Mom said. I raised one finger. "Think carefully before you continue." He looked at his mother. She stared forward, jaw set, refusing to meet his eyes. Finally, Daniel exhaled. "Mom signed it. I let her." There it was. The truth, smaller than I expected, but enough to expose the whole rot. I turned to Lorraine. "Did you coach my husband into allowing illegal withdrawals?" She lifted her chin. "I did what was necessary for this family's future." "And forging my name was part of that future?" Silence. Daniel put his face in his hands. My voice softened, not out of pity, but out of finality. "Lorraine, you manipulated your son into committing fraud. And you believed I wouldn't notice. But documentation doesn't lie. And neither do bank cameras." Her eyes snapped up at that. Yes. The bank manager had already confirmed he would provide footage if required. I stood slowly. "Here's what will happen. You will return every dollar by Friday. You will remove yourself from any account connected to this property. And Daniel will sign financial separation paperwork with me today." Daniel looked up sharply. "Separation. Not divorce," I clarified. "Protection. Until you regain my trust. If you can." Lorraine slammed her hand on the table. "You can't dictate terms." I looked at her with calm precision. "Watch me." Before anyone could respond, there was a knock at the front door, followed by the voice of the bank manager saying, "Mrs. Hale, I have the documents you requested." The moment the bank manager's voice drifted into the dining room, Lorraine froze. Daniel looked like someone had pulled the ground from beneath him. Emily closed her eyes as if bracing for impact. I walked to the door, greeted the manager with a polite smile, and accepted the sealed envelope he handed me. He nodded once, offering the quiet respect of a man who understood exactly what was happening, then left. When I returned to the table, I placed the envelope beside the binder. "These," I said, "are the verified copies of all transactions linked to the forged authorization, including the time-stamped footage of who signed the paperwork." Lorraine's complexion turned the color of wet ash. Daniel whispered, "Mom, what did you do?" I opened the envelope and slid out the printed summary. The bank follows fraud reporting rules. Legally, they were required to escalate this if I confirmed the forgery. Which I did. Daniel's head snapped up. "Margaret, are you pressing charges?" I met his eyes, steady and sad. Only if the money is not returned by Friday. Lorraine's voice cracked for the first time. You wouldn't dare. I would. And I will. She looked at Daniel as though urging him to rescue her, but for once, he didn't move. Excessive interference, deception, and illegal financial manipulation had consequences. Real ones. Emily spoke then, her voice quiet but firm. You can't keep using people, Lorraine. Especially not Margaret. She's the only one who's held this family together. Lorraine opened her mouth but no words came. By Thursday afternoon, the money reappeared in the renovation account. Every cent plus an additional $1,000, perhaps guilt, perhaps an attempt to soften the damage. Daniel signed the financial separation paperwork. He cried when he did it. Not because of the papers themselves, but because my calm had forced him to see something he had denied for most of his life, that his mother's control was not love. It was fear wearing a gentle face. The fallout was swift. Lorraine stopped visiting the property. She avoided our calls. She refused to look at me during family gatherings. Daniel began therapy, finally confronting the emotional reliance that had shaped his adult choices. He apologized daily. Sincerely. And slowly, very slowly, I saw the man he used to be re-emerge. Emily grew closer to me, not out of obligation but out of genuine respect. The earthquake had settled. The damage was visible. But so was the rebuilding. Weeks later, just when I thought everything had quieted, a letter arrived from Lorraine, one final attempt to rewrite the story. The letter was handwritten, an irony that wasn't lost on me. The careful loops, the practiced swirls, the aging penmanship of a woman who had once used handwriting as a weapon. I opened it slowly. Inside, Lorraine didn't apologize. Not truly. Her words were a mixture of pride and self-pity. She insisted she was trying to protect the family legacy, that I had overreacted, that I had embarrassed her. But at the bottom, beneath all the excuses, was a line that read, I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the same binder that held the evidence of her betrayal. Not for vengeance, not for spite, but for record. For truth. For clarity. Later that evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the late summer light fall across the garden. Daniel joined me quietly. He didn't speak at first. He simply sat beside me, his posture smaller, humbler, more grounded. I'm trying, he said finally. I know, I replied. And I meant it. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's choosing where to place your energy. I would no longer spend mine trying to fix people who didn't want to look at themselves clearly. I had documentation. I had truth. I had peace. And peace, once earned, becomes a shield no one can easily break. As I looked out at the yard we had once hoped to renovate together, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it forced me to claim. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's simply choosing not to be manipulated anymore. Lorraine's mantra echoed faintly in my memory. A good wife shares everything. Yes. A good wife shares honesty, boundaries, strength. But never blind obedience. Never silence in the face of exploitation. I took a slow breath, feeling the evening air settle around me like a soft cloak. And now, as I tell you this story, I offer you the same reminder I gave myself. Protect your signature. Protect your voice. Protect your peace. Because sharing is meaningful only when it's chosen, not coerced. If you found strength, clarity, or comfort in my story, tell me, what would you have done in my place?